The sea is eternal, stretching beyond the horizon where sky and water blend into endless blue. Its voice is never silent, whispering secrets through waves that rise and fall without pause. In the heart of this vastness lives Poseidon, guardian of depths and keeper of tides, unbroken. He is not merely a god of storms, but a witness to every promise ever spoken beside the shore. Long ago, the sea carried an oath, a vow bound not by chains, but by memory flowing in the currents. The waves remember what mortals forget, repeating the pledge in rhythms that touch every coast. Tonight, we follow that song, a tale where water becomes voice and time becomes echo. It is not a story of conquest nor of battle, but of balance between humans and the sea eternal. The ocean does not rage without reason, nor does it rest without purpose in its endless turning. Each wave carries meaning, and within their sound, the truth of an ancient oath still remains. Step closer now and listen. For the tide speaks softly, and its whispers are meant for you. This is the story of Poseidon and the wave eternal oath, a legend carried by the sea forever. The ocean floor is quiet, a world unseen, where silence holds secrets older than time itself. Light does not reach here. Only shadows move across the drifting sand and ancient coral. The water is heavy, pressing down with weight that only gods can endure without fear. In this endless hush, Poseidon stirs, watching the deep with eyes like shifting tides. He is not a stranger to silence, for he has ruled here since the birth of the sea. The stillness comforts him, though he knows silence always hides a story waiting to surface. Every current carries a trace of memory, a thread of something that once was spoken long ago. Here, Poseidon feels the pulse of the ocean, steady and eternal, like a heart without rest. His trident leans against stone, not as a weapon, but as a staff grounding him to this realm. For Poseidon is not always storm, nor always rage, but also the calm that holds the abyss. In his presence, the creatures of the deep drift slowly, their movements a prayer of respect. Whales sing above, their voices echoing down, though faint and softened by distance. Poseidon listens, knowing each sound, each ripple, is part of a larger song of the sea. The deep is not empty. It is alive, but alive in ways mortals cannot easily see. Faint lights flicker from hidden caves, the glow of life clinging to rock and salt. Tiny fish flash like sparks, weaving constellations in the darkness with every turn. All of it speaks to Poseidon, though no word is spoken in the way mortals know. He feels balance here, a rhythm kept for ages, unbroken and unyielding. Yet beneath the calm, there is something new, a murmur that unsettles even the god. It comes like a tremor in the tide, a whisper beneath the stillness of the deep. Poseidon closes his eyes, and the ocean speaks in the language of currents and swell. It is not anger, not fury, but a quiet call, as if the sea itself remembers a forgotten truth. He rises, his presence alone sending ripples outward, stirring the slumbering floor. The sand shifts, coral bends, and the water swirls gently around him, obeying without command. The god listens deeper, sinking his senses into the flow that moves beyond sight. There, in the hidden current, he finds the beginning of a story, faint yet unbroken. It is an oath, long sealed within the sea, carried like breath within its waves. The silence of the deep holds it, guarding it as though it were treasure unseen. Poseidon feels the weight of it, not heavy in his hand, but heavy in his heart. This oath is not his alone, nor was it spoken only by gods, but shared with mortals too. He remembers the ancient vow, though time has blurred its edges like shells worn smooth. The stillness deepens, as if the entire sea leans closer to remind him of its truth. Poseidon breathes slowly, his voice rumbling though soft. The sea remembers what they forget. Above him, the waters shift, the first stirring of waves that carry the oath to the shore. The silence of the abyss is broken, not by sound, but by meaning rising once more. Here begins the story, not with thunder nor storm, but with memory beneath the sea eternal. The tide moved restlessly, its rhythm uneven, as though the sea carried a thought it could not hold. On distant shores, fishermen paused, watching waters that no longer followed their trusted patterns. The waves rose higher than before, not in anger, but as if straining to speak with a new voice. Boats swayed uneasily, ropes pulled tight, while sailors whispered of omens carried by the restless tide. Children ran along the sand, chasing foam, unaware they were chasing fragments of an ancient song. The elders, with lines deep on their faces, stared silently at the sea, their eyes filled with memory. They had seen strange waters before, but never a pattern that seemed so alive, so deliberate. Each wave followed the next, not in random play, but like words formed carefully in liquid rhythm. Poseidon, far beneath, felt the movement travel down, shaking the deep with unheard meaning. He stood still, watching as the currents twisted into shapes unseen for countless ages. The ocean was speaking, not in storm nor in rage, but in a language of returning patterns. Above, gulls cried against the wind, their wings slicing through air, heavy with unspoken warning. On the horizon, the sea darkened, not with clouds, but with a shimmer like silver threads of memory. The tide pushed inland, softly at first, leaving marks upon the sand like script drawn by unseen hands. Villagers noticed the symbols, waves curling and retreating, leaving lines as if written in salt. Some saw nothing but water, yet others felt a strange pull in their hearts, as if remembering. Poseidon closed his eyes and listened, the whispers flowing through every current and ripple. The sea spoke of an oath once made, its words lost to mortals, but never forgotten by the tide. Every crest that rose, every fall that followed, echoed the vow of balance sworn long ago. The god knew this was no accident, no chance of wind or moon, but the sea reminding itself. The restless tide was a messenger, bearing the weight of truth that mortals had let slip away. It carried not threat nor punishment, but memory, longing to be heard once more by human ears. Sailors turned their faces to the horizon, uneasy, yet drawn by beauty they could not explain. The sea glowed faintly under the fading sun, as if every drop carried the light of old promises. Poseidon whispered into the current, his voice deep. You call to them, though they cannot yet hear. The waves answered with another pattern, rolling steady, pressing their rhythm into the sand again. Mortals may forget, Poseidon thought, but the sea never lets go. It remembers all that was sworn. The tide swelled, rising higher, yet breaking gently, as if cradling the shore in careful hands. At nightfall, the waters shimmered under moonlight, their surface alive with a dance of remembrance. Those who listened closely swore they could hear words woven into the crashing of the surf. Not words of warning, but of calling, a reminder dressed in the beauty of the restless tide. Poseidon knew this was only the beginning, the sea preparing to awaken the forgotten oath. And so the waves continued their song, rising and falling, never tiring, never ceasing their call. For the restless tide was not disorder, but a voice, an ancient voice, returning to be heard again. The sea carried a new rhythm, a voice hidden inside the rolling currents and restless swells. It was was not storm nor thunder, but something quieter, something older rising from the depths. Poseidon stood still in the deep, listening, letting the water carry its secret into his being. The voice was not one sound, but many, woven from waves, tides, and the pull of the moon. Every ripple joined another, until the ocean spoke in a chorus no mortal ear could yet hear. The god closed his eyes, letting the sea's whisper move through him like breath through lungs. It was memory, not prophecy, a reminder of words once carried by salt and foam long ago. The current swirled around him, tugging gently, urging him to remember what was once sworn. Above, the restless tide beat against the shore, shaping patterns like verses written in water. But here below, in the silence of the deep, the voice grew clearer, steady, almost human. Poseidon reached out, his hand brushing the current, and the voice surged stronger. It spoke of balance, of a bond made between the sea and those who walked the land. The waves were keepers of that bond, carrying it endlessly, never letting it fade from memory. Mortals had forgotten, distracted by time and change, but the sea had never once let go. The voice carried sorrow, not anger, as if mourning the silence of those who no longer listened. Poseidon felt it deeply, for he too had watched centuries pass like foam across the surface. He whispered low, "You are not forgotten. I hear you still, as I did on the first day." The ocean stirred, responding, its currents circling him like arms in a gentle embrace. Above, seagulls wheeled, their cries sharp against the air, echoing the message of the tide. Fishermen paused in their work, feeling the strange pull in their hearts they could not name. They heard only water, yet felt something linger, a weight of words hidden in the waves. Children laughed as they played, yet even they grew quiet, watching the tide's unusual dance. The sea had become a voice, shaping itself to be heard, though not all could understand. Only those who listened deeply, with more than ears, could sense the truth beneath the sound. Poseidon knew the ocean was calling not just to him, but to all who depended on its gifts. It asked not for worship, nor for fear, but for remembrance of the oath once spoken. The god raised his hand, and the waters around him brightened, glowing faintly in the dark. The voice grew stronger, carried on currents that reached upward to touch the surface. Its words were clear to him now. The oath remains, though forgotten by those who made it. Poseidon's gaze darkened with thought, for the message was both plea and warning. If mortals could not remember, the balance between sea and shore would falter once again. He turned toward the rising current, his steps slow, each one stirring the abyss around him. The deep seemed alive, following him, as if the sea itself wanted him to carry its message. "The voice of the current cannot be ignored," he whispered, "for it speaks the truth of ages." And so he listened, not as a god above, but as a witness to the sea's eternal memory. The voice did not fade, but grew steadier, carried by the tide that touched every coast. Mortals might sleep in forgetting, but the ocean never would, for the oath was carved in water. Poseidon breathed in the silence, knowing this was only the beginning of what was to come. The sea had spoken, and its voice would rise again, until the world remembered the eternal oath. Far beyond the sight of busy harbors, a strange island rose where none had stood before. Its cliffs shimmered in moonlight, wet stone gleaming as if carved freshly from the ocean's breath. Fishermen who glimpsed it swore they had never seen such land upon their charts or maps. The island appeared without warning, then vanished again with the turning tide as though unreal. Those who sailed near felt a chill, not of fear, but of awe, as if time bent around that place. Poseidon knew this was no ordinary land, but a fragment of memory drawn back from the deep. Long ago, when gods and mortals spoke in vows, the island had been a sacred meeting ground. Here, voices of the sea and voices of men once joined in harmony, bound by a solemn promise. The promise was not written on stone or etched in fire, but carried in the living waves. Now, the island stirred again, surfacing like a ghost, bearing the weight of forgotten truth. Its beaches glowed faintly, shells scattering like stars, as if the earth itself recalled the vow. Poseidon rose from the deep and walked upon its shore, each step echoing in the silence. The land welcomed him, though it had slept for centuries beneath the ocean's endless song. Winds circled softly, brushing the rocks, carrying scents of salt and ancient flowers unseen. He placed his hand upon the ground, and the earth pulsed faintly with memory, still alive. The island whispered of meetings long past, of mortals gathered to honor the sea's gift. It told of fishermen, wanderers, and families who stood together in reverence of balance. The waves then had been gentle, carrying their words like pearls into the heart of the deep. Now, the land asked silently why the voices had faded, why the promise lay forgotten. Poseidon listened, his face heavy with knowing, for he too had watched silence grow. The oath had not vanished, but its keepers had, leaving only the sea to remember. And so the island appeared again, summoned by the waves to remind both god and mortal. Villagers from afar saw it glimmer at dawn, though by noon it vanished into mist again. They spoke of visions, of shapes in the haze, of towers and paths that could not be real. Yet Poseidon knew it was no dream, but truth surfacing briefly, like breath-breaking water. The island was a sign, the sea's way of saying the time of remembrance had returned. He walked deeper inland, where ruins of stone stood half-buried, wrapped in vines of seaweed. Every stone hummed with echoes, words spoken long ago still vibrating in the silent air. Poseidon closed his eyes and felt the rhythm, the same as the tide, the same as the oath. The island's heart beat with the sea's heart, inseparable, eternal, alive in every grain of sand. Above, clouds drifted lazily, letting sunlight strike the shore in patterns like golden script. Poseidon traced one glowing line with his hand, and the earth trembled softly in response. It was as if the land remembered his touch and answered in the only language it knew. "The vow is not broken," he murmured, "only forgotten, waiting for breath to awaken it again." The waves crashed gently against the cliffs, their sound echoing like applause in the distance. But when he turned, the island was already beginning to fade, its form dissolving into mist. Soon, it sank once more, vanishing beneath the water, leaving only ripples on the surface. Yet its memory lingered, a reminder that truth does not die. It only waits to be found. Poseidon returned to the deep, carrying with him the island's whisper, heavy yet hopeful. For the forgotten land was not lost, but a sign, calling all to remember the eternal oath. The waves began to change, their movements forming patterns too deliberate to be chance. Each crest rose high, curled, and fell with rhythm, as if striking chords upon an unseen harp. Those who stood along the shore felt it, though they could not explain what stirred their hearts. The sea seemed alive, shaping words within foam, singing a hymn that mortals had forgotten. Poseidon felt the call strongest of all, for the ocean's whispers echoed through his very being. It was not a storm's roar, nor the whisper of wind, but something older and more sacred. The tide became a voice, carrying sounds that merged into chants of remembrance and truth. Children tilted their heads, sensing a song within the surf, though no instrument played. Elders closed their eyes, their memories stirred by rhythms they could almost recognize. The waves carried more than water. They carried fragments of an oath long hidden in salt. Poseidon walked the line between shore and sea, listening with the patience of eternity. The water touched his feet, curling around his ankles like words begging to be heard. He bent low, and the tide surged, lifting foam that shimmered like silver script in the night. "The oath remains," the sea whispered, "though the voices that made it have gone silent." Poseidon's heart stirred, for he remembered the vow spoken here, a bond never meant to fade. The sea had been witness, keeper, and messenger, carrying the promise through countless tides. Each wave rose, chanting again, as if demanding that the forgotten words be heard once more. Mortals did not understand fully, yet they felt awe, sensing something beyond their knowing. The sea was not angry, only insistent, longing to be remembered by those who had forgotten. The waves crashed in repeating rhythm, each one echoing the same solemn refrain. "The oath remains. The oath remains." The chant grew steady, pulsing in time with the moon. Poseidon stood tall, his eyes upon the horizon, seeing the sea shimmer as if alive. He knew the ocean was speaking not just to him, but to every soul who touched its edge. Fishermen knelt unconsciously, laying hands upon the wet sand as though in reverence. Mothers hushed their children, listening to the tide, though they heard only sound, not words. Yet deep within, their spirits stirred, for the chant was carried not to ears, but to hearts. The waves built higher, their rhythm unbroken, like drums of memory beating without end. Poseidon raised his hand, acknowledging the chant, and the sea quieted, but did not stop. It continued its song softer, carrying it into the distance, wrapping every coast in memory. For the call was not only for one shore, but for all shores touched by the eternal tide. The sea wished the oath to be heard across the world, its vow remembered by every land. Poseidon whispered, "I hear you, and I will not let them forget, not while the waves endure." The tide shimmered in response, curling around him, carrying the chant further outward. On distant islands, travelers looked to the sea, hearing music within its breaking foam. They could not name it, yet they felt its truth, a reminder older than their own lineage. The waves were no longer silent guardians, but singers, carrying the eternal oath aloud. Poseidon walked deeper into the water, his figure merging with the chant of the sea. The rhythm followed him, echoing into the deep, where it would never be silenced. And as the tide pulled back once more, it left the shore marked with patterns of remembrance. Words traced in salt and foam, fleeting yet eternal, whispering always. The oath remains. In the days that followed, the sea did not rest, nor did it hide its voice from mortal ears. At dawn, fishermen found their nets full yet untouched, as if the sea had gifted them bounty. They whispered prayers, though many did not know to whom they spoke. Only that gratitude was due. Children played along the shore and claimed the waves sang to them, teaching songs without words. Elders grew restless, their dreams filled with visions of a vow they could not clearly recall. Some spoke of ancient times when man and sea lived as one, bound in a pact of respect. Others dismissed it as superstition, yet even they felt unease as the tide grew ever louder. Poseidon watched from the deep, silent, his gaze fixed on how mortals would answer the call. The oath was not a chain, but a bridge, meant to bind trust between sea and humankind. But bridges crumble when left untended, and Poseidon feared neglect had weakened its stones. The ocean roared in places where storms had not touched, carrying reminders too strong to ignore. Boats drifted safely through sudden squalls, saved not by skill, but by unseen guidance. Fishermen returned with stories of voices in the foam, warning them when danger lay ahead. The sea was no longer content to be silent witness. It demanded recognition, remembrance. Villages along the coast began to gather at night, staring at the waves with hushed awe. Fires burned along the sand, and though no priest led them, prayers rose unbidden from hearts. Some wept, feeling the presence of something greater, though they could not give it a name. Poseidon rose unseen among them, watching as mortals reached toward memory with trembling hands. He felt sorrow, for they had forgotten the words, but not the feeling that bound them once. The oath lived in their spirits, dormant, waiting for flame to spark it back into light. On the third night, the tide brought with it fragments of stone from the vanished island. Shattered columns, carved with faded marks, washed ashore as though returned by the ocean itself. The villagers touched the stones reverently, tracing symbols they could not read, yet felt within. One child placed her ear against the rock and swore she heard a heartbeat inside. Her words spread quickly, and soon others pressed close, listening for the pulse of memory. And indeed, faintly, a rhythm throbbed, steady as the tide, carrying truth within silence. Poseidon saw and knew the sea was speaking through what remained, guiding them toward remembrance. The ocean had not forgotten the oath, and it refused to let mortals forget it either. A storm brewed upon the horizon, not born of anger, but of insistence and urgency. Lightning flickered above distant waters, not striking but illuminating the vastness of the sea. Thunder rolled low, carrying with it the chant that had filled the waves days before. The oath remains. The oath remains. The words echoed louder now, undeniable to all who heard. Fear rippled among the villagers, but all outweighed it, for they felt chosen, not cursed. Poseidon finally rose, though only as shadow, his form half hidden within the rolling surf. He towered in silence, yet his eyes glowed, watching, waiting to see what mortals would do. Would they run in fear or stand in reverence? Would they hear or turn away once more? The villagers trembled, but none fled. Instead, they bowed their heads, letting the waves wash them. In that moment, the bond sparked again, not fully restored, but alive enough to grow. Poseidon lowered his hand, and the storm above calmed, leaving only the steady rhythm of waves. The sea had spoken, the mortals had listened, and the bridge between them stirred with new life. But an oath once broken cannot be healed by silence alone. It must be spoken again. Poseidon knew the time was nearing when the vow must return to mortal lips or fade forever. The dawn after the storm carried a silence heavier than thunder, a silence filled with expectation. The villagers gathered again on the shore, their eyes searching the horizon for signs of change. Though the sky was clear, the sea shimmered strangely, its surface rippling with unseen voices. Children pointed at the waves, claiming they saw shapes swimming just beneath the silver foam. Some swore they glimpsed faces in the tide, watching with eyes as deep as the ocean itself. Poseidon lingered in shadow, his presence vast, though he revealed only fragments of his form. He waited not to frighten them, but to see if they would listen to what must be spoken. The oath could not be restored by the sea alone. Mortals must choose to speak it once more. An old woman stepped forward, her hands trembling, her voice breaking yet strong with memory. She recalled stories her grandmother told, tales of an ancient pact between man and sea. Though she knew not the words, her heart carried the truth, and she bowed before the waves. Others followed, laying offerings of bread, shells, and flowers upon the wet sand. The tide carried each gift gently away, as if accepting but waiting for more than silence. Poseidon felt the stirrings of hope, for reverence was not lost, though words had faded. Still, the oath needed voice, for words give shape to memory, and silence cannot hold forever. The sea answered with a swell, waves rising high, curling with silver light under the sun. They did not crash in anger, but formed a circle around the shore, enclosing all within. The villagers gasped, trapped yet unharmed, their feet sinking into the wet sand as water spoke. Foam shimmered, glowing faintly, and within it, letters began to appear like writing of light. The oath revealed itself, not in mortal tongue, but in symbols older than time itself. The people fell to their knees, overwhelmed, unable to read yet understanding with their souls. A child, the same who heard the stone's heartbeat, stood and placed her hand on the water. To everyone's wonder, the letters shifted, forming into words the villagers could understand. It was the sea translating itself, choosing the innocent as vessel to bridge its ancient tongue. She spoke softly, her voice carrying the weight of eternity, though she was only a child. The sea remembers. The sea protects. The sea and man are bound in trust and respect. Each word rang clear, echoed by the waves, filling the air with a rhythm older than fire. The villagers repeated after her, voices trembling yet steady, the oath reborn on their lips. Poseidon closed his eyes, and for the first time in ages, he felt the bridge rebuilt. The water calmed, the glowing letters dissolving into foam, but the words lingered in the air. The oath had been spoken, not perfectly, not fully, but enough to stir life back into memory. The sea accepted, its voice softening into gentle waves that lapped the shore with peace. Poseidon stepped closer, revealing more of himself, though still cloaked in mist and shadow. The villagers did not flee, for their fear had turned to reverence, and reverence to trust. He raised his trident high, and the waters bowed, forming a path of calm across the sea. It was a gift, a sign of blessing, proof that the oath had been heard and renewed. The child who spoke the vow fainted gently into her mother's arms, her duty fulfilled. The sea sang once more, but this time in joy, carrying melody across coasts and distant lands. Fishermen far away paused at their nets, hearing the song without knowing its source. Travelers on ships felt the sea calm, guiding them safely with invisible hands of memory. The world shifted, for the oath was not for one village alone, but for all who touched water. Poseidon returned to the deep, carrying peace within him, yet knowing the task was not done. For an oath restored must also be guarded, and mortals must keep it alive in their hearts. The sea had spoken, the people had answered, and the bridge had been rebuilt in fragile light. But Poseidon knew well that remembrance is a seed. It must be nurtured, or it fades again. The nights grew calmer after the vow returned, yet the sea's song lingered across every horizon. Villagers slept in peace, their dreams now filled not with storms, but with voices of the waves. The child who spoke the oath recovered quickly, her eyes shining with light that none could explain. She carried silence around her, yet her presence was like music, soothing all who came near. Poseidon watched her closely, for he knew the sea had chosen her as its mortal messenger. Though she was young, her spirit carried strength. shaped by innocence and touched by eternity. The village revered her quietly, offering kindness, knowing she bore a gift both heavy and sacred. At dawn, she often walked to the shore, placing her hands upon the water with gentle care. And when she did, the sea would calm, as though listening only to the rhythm of her breath. Poseidon rose unseen, whispering to the tide, teaching the waves to carry her touch farther. Far-off harbors began to feel the blessing, ships returning safe from waters once feared. Merchants spoke of seas strangely calm, as though the ocean itself guided them homeward. News spread quickly, reaching beyond the village, though none knew the source of the wonder. The child's gift was not just for one place, but for all shores touched by the eternal tide. One evening, she stood before the villagers, her small voice carrying far beyond her years. "The sea remembers," she said, "and it waits for us to remember too. Not in fear, but love." Her words rippled through hearts, planting seeds of reverence in soil long hardened by forgetfulness. Elders wept, for they knew truth when they heard it, even if memory had faded from lips. Poseidon felt pride stir within him, for mortals were beginning to walk the bridge once more. But he also knew this was only the beginning, for remembrance without action soon fades again. So the sea began to teach, not through storms, but through lessons written in tide and foam. One morning, fishermen found their nets too heavy, bursting with more than they could carry. The villagers saw and learned to take only what was needed, leaving the rest to the sea. Another day, the tide returned broken wood, reminding them of ships lost to greed and haste. They understood then that balance was the heart of the oath, and balance must be guarded. Children played by the shore, gathering shells, but when they left, the waves took some back. They laughed, knowing the sea had claimed its share, a gentle reminder of the pact. The bond grew slowly, not in grand gestures, but in simple acts of care and respect. Poseidon, though unseen, walked among them, guiding with patience, watching with eternal eyes. The child felt his presence most of all, though she spoke of it rarely, keeping it close. She knew he was testing them, waiting to see if they could carry memory without command. At sunset, she sat by the rocks, listening to the tide hum softly, a song only she heard. She whispered promises to the waves, words of love and care, simple but strong in truth. And the sea answered, not in words, but in warmth, wrapping her with gentle foam. The villagers began to join her one by one, offering words of thanks to the water. They found joy in the ritual, not out of fear, but out of gratitude and belonging. Poseidon watched as the bridge strengthened, stone by stone, each act binding mortal and sea. He knew then the oath was no longer fragile memory, but living, carried in hearts once more. Yet he also felt a shadow stir, faint but real, far beyond where mortal eyes could see. For where oaths are reborn, trials soon follow, testing their strength against time and forgetting. The child's role was not ended, but only beginning, for her voice would be needed again. The sea sang with hope, but Poseidon stood watchful, guarding the fragile bond with wary eyes. The days grew longer, the sun warm upon the waves, and the village thrived beneath the sea's blessing. The oath was alive again, carried in every gesture of gratitude, in every song whispered to the tide. But even blessings carry weight, for the sea is vast, and balance must always be tested by time. Poseidon lingered in the deep, watchful, sensing that shadows still stirred beyond mortal sight. The child, chosen by the sea, felt those shadows too, though she spoke of them only in dreams. Her sleep grew restless, filled with visions of black waters and voices calling from the abyss. She told her mother once, whispering, "The sea cries, but I don't know why," before falling silent. The elders gathered, troubled, for they had long believed peace, once broken, never lasts forever. One night, the tide pulled strangely, retreating farther than any living soul had ever seen. Villagers gathered with torches, staring at the empty seabed glistening under the moonlight. Fishes flopped helplessly on the wet sand, and shells cracked under the weight of silence. It was a sign, though none could read it clearly, save the child whose eyes widened with fear. She felt the pull of something ancient, not Poseidon, but deeper, darker, older than his reign. The sea roared suddenly, rushing back with a force that knocked torches from trembling hands. Waves swallowed the shore, not in anger, but as though chasing something unseen and vast. When the water calmed, silence returned, heavier now, as if the ocean itself held its breath. Poseidon rose in shadow, his trident glowing faintly, his gaze fixed on the endless horizon. The villagers knelt, but he did not speak to them. Instead, he looked toward the child. Her small frame shook, yet her eyes glowed faintly, echoing the light of the restless waves. "The sea remembers," she whispered, though no one had asked, and Poseidon bowed his head. For he knew the truth. Memory does not only awaken what is kind, but also what was buried. Long ago, before oaths of trust, there were other bonds, forged in wrath and forgotten by men. Creatures once bound in chains of silence stirred beneath trenches no mortal had ever seen. They remembered too, and their hunger rose with the tide, answering the call of old memory. The villagers saw none of this, only calm waters. But Poseidon's heart thundered with warning. The child clutched her chest as if a second heartbeat echoed inside her, strong and unrelenting. She collapsed into her mother's arms, whispering words that were not her own, old as the sea. Shadows rise, the deep remembers, the chains weaken, and the forgotten will return. The villagers wept, fearing curses, but Poseidon raised his hand, silencing their cries. "This is not curse but memory," he said, his voice rolling like thunder across the shore. "The oath binds, but it also awakens, and we must stand guard against what lies beneath." His eyes blazed, and the sea behind him roared, yet the child's frail body trembled still. He looked upon her with sorrow, for he knew she carried a burden far beyond her years. The villagers clung to one another, torn between gratitude and fear of what had been awoken. The waves lapped gently, almost tender, as if to remind them the sea was both giver and keeper. Poseidon lifted his trident high, the water rising into a spiral that touched the darkened sky. Symbols shimmered within the spray, runes older than time, marking the oath's true power. It was not only a promise of peace, but also a seal, a chain forged to guard what must not rise. And now, that chain was weakening, not broken, but stretched thin with the weight of memory. The child, eyes half closed, whispered, "It comes," and the sea itself seemed to shiver. Poseidon lowered his trident, and the spiral collapsed, waves raining softly upon the shore. He turned his gaze to the horizon once more, silent, knowing the true test had only begun. The sea grew restless in the nights that followed, its voice humming like a warning beneath calm waves. The villagers felt it in their bones, though the sky was clear and the horizon shone with peace. Children grew quiet, watching the tide as though it might speak again with secrets only they could hear. The chosen child sat often on the shore, her gaze fixed far beyond sight, her lips moving without sound. Poseidon lingered nearby, unseen to most, his vast presence heavy as the storm he did not release. He knew what stirred below, the forgotten chained in darkness, waiting for cracks to widen in silence. The oath had awakened them, not by intention, but because memory does not return in halves. Light and shadow both rise when the past is called, and the sea remembers all, not only peace. One evening, the villagers gathered, asking the child what she saw in the deep beyond their reach. Her voice was faint yet clear, carrying words she did not choose, but merely repeated. "They are coming," she said, "the ones who were bound before the oath, before the trust." The elders shuddered, for their oldest tales spoke only vaguely of such beings, nameless and feared. Poseidon stepped forth then, revealing more of himself than he had in centuries. The mist fell away, and his trident gleamed like a star forged from salt and fire. "The sea is vast," he said, "and not all who dwell within it honor balance or peace." He told them of the deep places where even his power waned, where hunger shaped ancient kings. Long before mortals learned fire, battles raged in the trenches of the abyss, unseen by sun or sky. There creatures were bound, sealed by oaths of stone and tide, imprisoned beneath memory. But memory is fragile, and with the vow reborn, so too the chains grow thin once more. The villagers trembled, torn between awe at his words and fear of what they truly meant. The child reached for the water, her hand glowing faintly, and the tide answered with sorrow. Foam curled around her fingers, whispering songs too old for mortals, yet clear to Poseidon's ears. "They rise," she said again, and her voice did not sound like her own, but like the sea itself. Poseidon lowered his trident, the waves settling, though his eyes carried the weight of storms. "I cannot fight them alone," he declared, his voice deep as thunder rolling across mountains. "The oath binds me to guard, but mortals too must stand, or the bridge will crumble again." He spoke of unity, of the need for humans to remember not only blessings, but responsibilities. The oath was not a gift, but a covenant, a bond woven of trust, sacrifice, and shared duty. If mortals abandoned it once more, no storm could save them from the abyss unchained. The villagers listened, their fear great, but within it, a spark of courage began to glow. The child looked to her people, her small frame trembling, yet her voice firm as she spoke. "The sea gave us life," she said, "and now it asks we guard it, as it has always guarded us." Her words rippled through hearts, planting resolve where doubt had taken root too long. Poseidon felt the shift, a current stronger than fear, flowing through their mortal souls. The sea roared not in anger, but in agreement, waves rising in a circle around the shore. Symbols of light shimmered in the foam once more, though darker shadows coiled beneath. The oath pulsed, alive, binding mortal and god, though the weight of it pressed heavy on all. The villagers raised their voices, repeating the vow, not as followers, but as keepers of the pact. Their chant rose like a tide, steady, unbroken, carrying strength that even Poseidon revered. The child collapsed again, exhausted, but smiling faintly, for she knew the bridge held strong. Poseidon gazed into the horizon, his trident raised high, a beacon against the coming dark. The sea answered with thunder, yet beneath the sound lingered a whisper of what was to come. The chains were weakening still, the shadows stirring, and soon the test would truly begin. The horizon burned with dawn, yet beneath the calm waves, the sea carried a silence older than light. The child stirred in her sleep, whispering words no mortal tongue had shaped for 1,000 years. Her mother held her close, praying silently, though prayers seemed fragile against such vast forces. Poseidon lingered at the edge of sight, his form a mountain of shadow rising from silver foam. He knew the moment was near when memory and shadow would clash, testing all who carried the oath. The villagers gathered once more at the shore, fear in their hearts, but courage in their eyes. They had lived under storms. Now they chose to stand not as victims, but as guardians. The sea trembled, and deep below, chains long hidden cracked with echoes that shook the world. Dark shapes stirred in trenches untouched by sun, vast and hungry, awakened by broken silence. Poseidon raised his trident, and the waters bowed, forming a circle of calm around the shore. "The oath is your shield," he thundered, "but only if you hold it in your hearts without falter." The child awoke then, her eyes glowing, her small hand lifted as if answering an unseen call. Waves surged toward her, but broke gently, wrapping her like a cloak, carrying her voice across all. "The sea remembers," she cried, "and so must we, for shadow cannot rule where memory is strong." Her words became light, each syllable burning upon the foam, weaving symbols across the tide. The villagers joined her, repeating the vow, their voices steady, echoing across wind and water. The shadows rose higher, black forms breaking the surface, their roar shaking sky and earth alike. But the oath bound them, chains reforged by mortal breath, light tightening where darkness sought escape. Poseidon struck his trident upon the sea, and lightning split the waves with fire and thunder. The Dark Ones screamed, sinking back into the abyss, their hunger denied by the power of memory. Silence fell once more, broken only by the crash of waves and the steady breath of the tide. The child collapsed, cradled by her people, yet a faint smile touched her lips. Peace, returning. Poseidon stood tall, his eyes no longer clouded with sorrow, but bright with pride and relief. "The oath lives," he said, "and it will endure as long as you carry it in deed, not word." He lowered his trident, and the sea calmed. Silver foam sparkling like stars scattered upon the shore. The villagers wept, but their tears were of joy, for they had faced the abyss and endured. They looked upon the child with reverence, knowing she was chosen not by chance, but by fate. She was not a savior alone, but a reminder that the sea's bond was written in every heart. Poseidon turned to the horizon, his vast form fading slowly back into mist and memory. He was not gone, only watching, bound forever to the oath and to those who honored it. The village thrived in years that followed, their lives shaped by balance, gratitude, and respect. Fishermen took only what they needed. Sailors prayed with thanks before setting upon the waves. Children grew with stories of the vow, taught not as fear, but as love for the living sea. And when storms came, they stood unbroken, chanting the oath, their voices steady against the gale. The child grew older, her eyes still touched by the sea's light, her heart forever bound to it. She carried no crown, no title, but all knew her as the voice of memory, keeper of balance. Poseidon's song lingered always, woven into tides, heard by those who listened with reverence. For the sea remembers, and so must we, lest shadow rise again where memory falls to silence. And thus the story closed, not in ending, but in promise, a bridge of trust carried into forever.